Hello and welcome to the Trial Files. I'm your host, Christine Worth. Last time we sat through another day of the state trying to convince the jury that everything about the investigation was neat, clean, and totally under control. Except it wasn't. We learned that the so-called crime scene, quote unquote, Steven Avery's garage, had been left completely open for 4 months before investigators suddenly went back in and found new evidence. Totally makes sense, right? We also heard the prosecutor, Ken Kratz, repeatedly call burned material from the burn barrels human remains, even though no expert had even confirmed that yet. And those Daisy Fuentes rivets, or the rivet that they pulled from the burn barrel, is supposedly from Teresa's jeans. And that brings us to day 10 of the trial. And court kicks off with a discussion of that juror who had previously been on a jury in which Remacher, one of the investigators in the Avery case, was the one seeking damages for a traffic accident in which he sustained injuries. And this juror, she was on the jury that awarded him over $100,000. Now, I thought that the case was already settled with this juror, the judge keeping her on the Avery case, but it seems like some things weren't cleared up. Then it gets into yet another juror who has to be dismissed, and then a whole long ass discussion outside the presence of the jury about the Fourth Amendment and the searches and all this other stuff. Now, usually I'll just out and out read these, but it takes a lot of time. It's dry, it's full of legal speak, and in the past, I've read the whole thing and then given a TLDR, too long, didn't read explanation. From today forward, it's just going to be the TLDR explanation instead of the whole thing. I mean, they're great if you want a good nap or something, but I think you would rather just have a quick explanation about what was discussed. So we're going to start with that. Once that's settled, the state will then call its first witness of the day, Katie Halbach, Teresa's sister. It's a shift in tone. Up until now, we've been hearing from cops, from techs, and investigators. But Katie then brings us back to who this really started with, a young woman who vanished after doing her job. So with that said, let's get into it. And it begins with the court calling the case. Attorney Kratz is there, the prosecutor, along with Attorney Strang, one of the attorneys for Steven Avery. And then the court, the judge, goes on to say, all right, I met with counsel in chambers this morning before beginning. There are a few matters to take up before we bring in the jury. And so here's the summary of what they discussed. So the previous juror issue, if you listen to that episode, one of the jurors had realized that she had served on a civil case years earlier, years meaning like I think it was 7 years, where Detective Remacher was one of the main witnesses. He was actually the plaintiff. She remembered awarding him damages, but didn't recall much else about the case, not whether he testified or even many details about the case at all. The defense said, hold up, that's bias. If you've already ruled in favor of somebody, how can you sit on a jury that's now deciding whether that same person is credible? It's human nature. Once you've believed someone, you're inclined to keep believing them. The prosecution brushed it off like it didn't matter, and the judge agreed. He said she could stay on the jury. So that's how the day began. Once this was settled, it was discovered that another juror had to be excused because of a death in the family. And then the court, which everybody agreed to, by the way, nobody was an asshole about it. And then the court moved on to the big stuff, the legality of those searches on Steven Avery's property. Now, the jury is still not in the room. This part was strictly just for the record. Attorney Strang one of Stephen's defense attorneys stood up and argued that the entire week of police activity on Avery's property, meaning in November, had violated the Fourth Amendment. Now, if you're not a lawyer, and thank God most of us aren't, the Fourth Amendment is the one that protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures. It's the rule that says police need a good reason and a valid warrant before they can go digging through your home, your car, your property. In simple terms, it's what keeps the government from just showing up and tearing apart your life whenever they feel like it. And Strang's argument was that the police had done exactly that. He said that they treated Stephen's property like this playground in and out for a solid week back in November 2005. They'd search one area, leave, come back, change their story, call it something different, a brief search, a thorough search, a follow-up search. And Strang said, no, there's no such thing as a practice search. You get one fair shot under the law. After that, you need a new warrant. And he compared it to baseball spring training, joking that the officers were running Cactus League searches, warm-ups, practice runs, until they finally decided to play for real. Then he hit on this so-called dog delay. Remember, officers waited 3 full days before checking the burn pit because supposedly a chained dog was in the way. And Strang just laid it out. It was like, really? You had 40 acres, a full law enforcement team, total control of the property, and one dog that stopped you for 3 days? And then the state, and of course the state's not buying it, and instead of Kratz, I know, crazy, right? Instead of Kratz, it was prosecutor Tom Fallon who argued this point, and he said that everything that the police did was totally legit. He said they had valid warrants, they acted in good faith, and that all of the searching was part of one continuous investigation. He even said that the burn barrels and the burn pit weren't private areas at all, more like trash heaps that anybody could go through. In legal terms, he was arguing those areas didn't fall under Fourth Amendment protection because they were basically abandoned. And as for the chained dog, Fallon said that waiting was the right call, that police were being cautious, not careless, but then on the other hand, they did at some point, Bobby Dassey, who, lived on the same 40-acre property, he had to come back in and get his dog. They let him do that. He knew Stephen's dog, which was the one that was chained up. He could have gotten him. I don't know why he didn't or why, they just didn't let him take the dog, but who knows? So on one side, you have Strang, the defense, saying that the police kept pushing the limits until the Fourth Amendment really didn't mean much anymore. And on the other hand, you have the prosecution insisting that law enforcement did everything by the book. In the end, the judge didn't make a ruling. He said he wanted to hear more evidence, especially about what exactly went on with the burn pit before making a decision. So to further summarize what happened, one juror had a history with a key cop in the Avery case. They kept her on. One juror had to be dismissed or was dismissed because of a death in the family. The cops kept searching until they got what they wanted during the November searches. The state said it was all perfectly fine, and the judge says, hey, we'll deal with this later. So now we move on to the first witness of the day, which is Teresa's sister, Katie Halbach. And she's all of 15 at the time. So let's see what she has to say. And the direct examination is being done by, who else? Attorney Kratz. And he says, Katie, how old are you? I'm 15. I'm sorry? 15. And do you go to school? Yep. What grade are you in? I'm a sophomore. In what community do you live? What city do you live in? I live in Hilbert, Wisconsin. And who do you live with, Katie? I live with my family, Tom and Karen Halbach, and my sister, Kelly Halbach. All right. Before October 31st of 2005, did you have another sister? Yes. Tell the jury who that was, please. It was Teresa Halbach. Let me show you a picture of what has been received as exhibit number 1. Tell us who that is. That would be my sister, Teresa Halbach. Katie, can you describe your relationship with your sister? Where did she live, first of all? First, she lived in Green Bay, then she went to college, then later she moved next door to us. Okay. When she lived next door to you, did you have occasion to meet with her or see her a lot? Yeah, she would come over sometimes and hang out with us, or sometimes on the weekend, me and Kelly would go over to her house. All right. Who's Kelly? She's my little sister. How much younger is Kelly than you? She's 2 years younger than me. And how much older was Teresa than you? She was 11 years older than me. As sisters, and especially as sisters who lived literally next door to each other, what kind of things would you guys do when you hung out together? We would watch movies or watch TV or like play card games or just hang out. All right. Let me ask you, Katie, like most sisters, would you ever talk about shopping or clothes or things like that? God, seriously. I'm sorry. That's just so. Yeah, and makeup and everything else. Oh my God. Sorry. Yes. Did you ever go shopping with your sister Teresa? Yes. And were you aware of the clothes that Teresa wore? Yes. I'm going to specifically ask you about Teresa's blue jeans, okay? Let me first ask you, Katie, if you were aware of any specific pairs of blue jeans that Teresa owned that she had at her house. Well, she had a lot of Weatherly jeans just because she really liked their jeans, and I know she had a pair of Daisy Fuentes jeans. Let me stop you there. How do you know that she had a pair of Daisy Fuentes jeans? Well, one day she showed me a new pair of jeans she had, and I noticed that the brand was Daisy Fuentes. And I knew that Daisy Fuentes was an older person, so I told Teresa that she has old person jeans. As those of us that are my age, do you think Daisy Fuentes is an older person? Is that what you told her? Well, she's not old, but she's not young. But you commented, in fact, you teased your sister about wearing an old person's jeans. Isn't that right? Yes. After your sister's disappearance and after you learned that your sister had died, did you have occasion to go back to her house and look through some of her stuff? Yes, we did. When you looked through her stuff, Katie, did you find her Daisy Fuentes jeans? We did not. Sometime during this investigation, were you asked to join or accompany a police officer, I think it was Officer Fassbender, in trying to find that pair of jeans or trying to find a pair that was just like those jeans? I did. Where did you go to get those? We went to Kohl's. And do you know if Kohl's department store is a place that carries Daisy Fuentes jeans? Yes, they do. Do you know if Daisy Fuentes jeans are carried anywhere other than Kohl's? I do not know. Katie, I have handed you what's been marked as exhibit number 288. Can you tell the jury what that is, please? They are a pair of Daisy Fuentes jeans. And have you seen those before? Yes, I have. Tell the jury how you have seen those before. I went with Mr. Fassbender to Kohl's one day, and he asked me to pick out a pair of Daisy Fuentes jeans that I thought Teresa would have worn. Did you try to also pick out the same size that she would have worn? Yes, I did. Why don't you hold those up and show the jury? I want you to hold up and show the jury the front and the back of those jeans, if you would. Okay. Now, on the back pocket of those jeans, there's some stitching. Do you see that? Yes. Do you know what that stitching is called on the back pocket? No, I don't. Okay, Katie, let me ask you, do you know what holds a pair of jeans together? Rivets, maybe? I'm really struggling with this in my own head because I'm like, hey, they were just talking about stitching. Why wouldn't she say, hey, it's the stitching that holds the stuff together? But no, she says rivets. I mean, what 15-year-old says rivets? Anyhow, let's continue. Okay, when looking at exhibit number 288, do those jeans have rivets? Yes, they do. And on those jeans, do those rivets say anything? They say Daisy Fuentes. Mr. Wiegert is going to grab those from you as I ask you one or two other questions. Do you know when the last time when you saw Teresa wearing her Daisy Fuentes jeans was? I don't remember. Do you remember what size jeans your sister Teresa wore? She probably would have worn anywhere between like a 5 or an 8. Some clothes, I don't know much about girls' clothes, but they run different sizes. Is that right? Yeah, depends on like the store, whatever. I'm going to have Mr. Wiegert turn on a machine, which is called an Elmo machine. Mr. Fallon is going to help him as well. And then Attorney Kratz says you can probably zoom in a little bit more too. And then he continues. Katie, is that one of those rivets that you saw? Yes, it is. What does it say on it? Daisy Fuentes. And then Attorney Kratz says, thank you, Mr. Wiegert. And then he continues. Katie, the other thing that I want to talk to you about is an exhibit that I have handed you. It's blue in front of you. I think it's exhibit number 287. Have you ever seen that before? Yes, I have. And unwrap that, please, and show it to the jury and tell the jury what it is. It's a blue lanyard. Does it say anything on it? It says Air National Guard. Katie, does that look familiar to you? Yes, it does. And how does that look familiar? I was at the EAA convention 2 summers ago, and I was at an exhibition building, and it was the Air National Guard had like a little stand, and they had free lanyards, and I picked it up. Now, a lanyard, or at least that part of the lanyard, and I'm going to show you a picture of it here. There are 2 pictures in front of you. Let's just identify those real quickly. Do you see those pictures in front of you? Yes. Can you look at exhibit number 285 and tell me if that's what we're looking at up on the big screen? Yes, it is. That lanyard that you got at the Air National Guard, was there another part that went with it? Yes, there was a little clip that clipped on the end. Do you know what went on that little clip? A keychain. Now, a couple summers ago, Katie, when you picked up that lanyard and that keychain, did you give that to anybody? I gave it to my older sister, Teresa. Let's look at the next picture, okay? That's exhibit number 286. Do you see that picture? Yes. Tell the jury what that is, please. It is a picture of the lanyard and the connecting piece that was with it. I'm going to show the jury now exhibit number 286. Do you recognize the piece or the other piece of the lanyard, the thing that's called the fob? Do you know that that's called a fob? Yeah. All right. Do you recognize that? Yes, I do. And what is that? It's the little connecting piece with the keychain and a key on it. All right. Mr. Wiegert is finally going to hand you an exhibit. Attorney Kratz then says, what's the exhibit number, Mr. Wiegert? Detective Wiegert says 211. Attorney Kratz says, all right. I'm going to ask Mr. Wiegert if he would be so kind as to, if those items could be placed together. And then he continues. Now, Katie, just touching the lanyard, that is just touching the blue area, which would be to your left, could you hold up that entire key for us, please? Hold it up nice and high so we can see it. Is that lanyard or does that fob fit into that lanyard? Yes, it does. And does that look the same as when you gave it to your big sister, Teresa? It does. Attorney Kratz then says, I would move the admission of exhibits 287, 288, 285, and 286 at this time, and I have no further questions. The court says, any objection? Attorney Strang says, I don't think so. I missed 285, though. The court says, that is a photo, I believe, of the lanyard without the key fob. Attorney Strang says, thank you. No objection to any of those 4. The court says, very well, those exhibits are admitted. Mr. Strang, are you going to be doing the questioning? Attorney Strang says, I am. Thank you. And then the cross-examination begins. And good morning. I'm going to call you Miss Halbach, okay? Because we don't know each other and we're in a formal sort of place, okay? And I'm Mr. Strang. You probably figured that out long ago. The jeans exhibit 288. Now, when guys buy jeans, typically it's by waist size and then an inseam. Yeah, an inseam length. And okay. And these things look like they just have a size 6. Yeah. Okay. When I don't know if you can answer this, give it a whirl. When women, or for that matter, girls, buy blue jeans like these Daisy Fuentes jeans, do the legs always just come in one length? Sometimes there could be a 6 short, 6 regular, and a 6 long. Okay. And do you know what your sister Teresa wore in terms of short, regular, or long? Probably a regular. Okay. And then sometimes then, if it's you or another woman or girl, do you have to hem the pants or change the length of them? Sure. Because there's just the 3 sizes, basically. Yeah. Of length in the leg. Yeah. Okay. And you don't know whether on the Daisy Fuentes jeans Teresa had to either roll up the pants leg or hem it or something? No, I don't know. Okay. So you showed us the rivets. What what do you close the waist with on those jeans? A button. Does that kind of look like, more or less, like the rivet, except a little bigger? Yeah. Okay. It seems to be metal. Does that seem right? Yes. Is that the button you just described? Yeah. Okay. What did you ever see Teresa use the lanyard you bought her? Yes, I did. Did she keep any other keys on there? I'm not sure. One way or the other? She might have. I don't know. Do you know, did your sister Teresa typically carry a purse when she was going somewhere in her car? I believe she did. But you don't know where she carried keys or other things that might go on a keychain? No, I don't. Miss Halbach, do you have any memory at all of about how long ago you would have seen this pair of old person's jeans, the pair of Daisy Fuentes jeans that you actually saw Teresa have? It was probably more recent because it was fresh in my memory. Mhm. But you didn't, I mean, you don't remember now what year or what time of year, that kind of thing? No, I don't. I assume at the time it didn't make a big impression on you. This was just a new pair of jeans or something? Yeah. Okay. You weren't with Teresa when she bought them? I wasn't. Attorney Strang says, okay, that's all the questions I'm going to ask you. Thanks. Attorney Kratz says, I have got nothing further, Judge. Thank you. The court says, very well, you are excused. And Mr. Kratz, you may call your next witness. And Attorney Kratz says, actually, it's Mr. Gahn. Oh, we have a new prosecutor asking questions. The court says, sorry, Mr. Gahn. Attorney Gahn says, thank you, Your Honor. State would call Ron Groffy to the stand. And the clerk asks Groffy, to raise his right hand. He's sworn in and asked to spell his last name. And then Attorney Gahn begins his direct examination. And how are you employed, sir? I'm employed as a forensic scientist with the Wisconsin Department of Justice Crime Laboratory Bureau, stationed in Madison, Wisconsin. My working title is Forensic Imaging Specialist. And how long have you been employed at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab? I have been with the crime lab for about 32 years. Oh, that's really impressive. And what are your duties currently at the crime lab? My primary duty is the technical unit leader for the forensic imaging unit, and responsibility includes administration of the unit, photographing evidence that may be brought into the laboratory, and also doing whatever imaging analysis might be required of our unit. And could you explain or describe for the jury exactly what is a forensic scientist imaging specialist? Again, as I previously stated, my duty is to examine photographic evidence, take pictures of evidence that is submitted to the laboratory, evidence that may be used as part of analysis. There may be things on evidence that needs to be imaged before other analysts also or scientists can look at it. That's our primary duty. The court says, excuse me, Mr. Groffy, can you move the microphone over closer? Sorry, Your Honor. The court says, that's good. Says, okay, I don't think it likes me. And then Attorney Gahn continues, Mr. Groffy, on November 6th of 2005, Did you take photographs of a 1999 Toyota RAV4 that belonged to Teresa Halbach? Yes, I did. And where did you take those photographs? That would have been at the Wisconsin State. The court again says, Mr. Groffy, you can move it over closer. The feedback was because I had the volume turned up to high. The witness says, is this better, Your Honor? And the court says, go ahead. And he continues his answer. That would have been at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab located in Madison, Wisconsin. And also on November 8th, 2005, did you take photographs of a blue 1993 Pontiac Grand Am that belonged to Steven Avery? That is correct. I did. And what I'm going to ask now is for Mr. Fallon to bring up to you a pack of photographs. Mr. Groffy, if you would just quickly look through those photographs and tell me when you are finished looking at each one of them. I'm done, sir. And did you take those photographs? Yes, I did. And as you look at those photographs today, do they accurately portray the condition of both of those vehicles as you photographed them back in November of 2005? Yes, they do. Mr. Groffy, on the back of each of those photographs, there's an exhibit number. They are sequentially numbered exhibit 289 through 305. I would like you to take the top photograph, which would be exhibit 289, and I'm going to ask you to describe what that photograph is of. And please tell the jury that, and then we're going to show that. Well, here it is up on the screen. Describe what that photograph is, please. State's Exhibit 289 is the exterior view of the RAV4 from the driver's side of the vehicle. And that photograph that you have in your hand, that's the same photograph that is up on this big screen? That is correct. Sir, will you please take the next photograph and describe that? Tell us what the exhibit number is and describe it for the jury. That's State's Exhibit 290. That is the front interior portion of the RAV4 looking from the driver's side of the vehicle. And is that photograph the same photograph that we have up on the big screen? Yes, it is. And please continue. State's Exhibit 291 is a photograph of the interior of the RAV4 looking at part of the driver's side, I guess you would call it, instrument panel near the ignition switch. And is that photograph represented up on the big screen? Yes, it is. Mr. Groffy, I would like to ask you, is there anything about this photograph that you did any further processing of this vehicle with? Yes, the area that shows the red stain, I did a presumptive test on that area. And what is a presumptive test? This is a presumptive test for the presence of blood. It's known as phenolphthalein. Could you describe a little more for the jurors just how that stain appeared to you? It was a reddish color stain on the dash. You did the presumptive test for blood? Yes, I did. I'm sorry, sir, what were the results for that? It was positive. Next exhibit, please. State's Exhibit 292. That is some items that were discovered on the front passenger seat of the RAV4. And is that photograph represented on the big screen? Yes, it is. Next exhibit, sir. State's Exhibit 293. That is a view, again, of the front passenger area, looking through the front passenger door of the seat and the floor area and part of the dash. And again, where were these photographs taken? At the Wisconsin State Crime Lab in Madison. And is the photograph that you just described accurately represented up here on the big screen? Yes, it is. The next exhibit, please. Oh, this is going to get a little tedious. And that would be State's Exhibit 294. This is the frame area of the RAV4 toward the passenger side back seat. And what was the purpose of taking this photograph? This was to show a reddish stain that was on that frame area. When you were taking these photographs, was anyone suggesting areas of the RAV4 for you to take photographs of? Yes, in this particular area, I was actually directed to make this photograph by our bloodstain pattern analyst, Nick Stalkey. Mr. Groffy, I'm going to ask Mr. Fallon here, or Mr. Kratz perhaps, to bring up a laser pointer And I would like you to just point out to the jury this area that the blood spatter expert, Mr. Stalkey, wanted you to photograph. It would have been approximately in this area right here. And again, could you just describe for the jurors where exactly is that located? That was on the passenger side of the vehicle toward the rear seat. Okay. And the next line, please. That would be States Exhibit 295. That's a view looking into the cargo area of the RAV4 toward the passenger side of the cargo area. And did anyone direct you to take this photograph? This particular photograph would have been taken as part of our standard overall photographs of the vehicle. At a later time, I was also told by Nick Stalkey, again, to get some medium, what we call medium, using an close-up extra photographs of those areas also. What was in the back of this cargo area of the RAV4 that you wanted photographed? There appeared to be stain patterns that contained blood, and he was interested in recording the pattern information. Could you take the laser point and point out those areas? That would have been approximately in this area here. And then later on, there was also some area in here that he had me photograph. Did you do any presumptive testing in this area of the vehicle? Yes, I also did a presumptive test in approximately this area, and the test was positive. And positive for what, sir? For blood. Next exhibit. This would be States Exhibit 296. This is a closer view of that stained area in the back cargo portion of the RAV4 behind the passenger's rear seat, excuse me. And is this the area that you stated that you did a presumptive test for blood? Yes, that's correct, sir. Next photograph, please. This would be States Exhibit 297. This, again, is a closer view of that stained area within the cargo portion area of the RAV4 behind the rear seat. And could you just describe for the jurors, when you looked at this stain, what did you observe? What was the condition of the stain? It was pretty much what you see on the photograph. It was reddish in color. It appeared to be over an area of that particular rear quarter panel. Next exhibit, please. This would be Exhibit 298. This is the molding and the metal frame area as you opened the cargo door of the RAV4, where the carpeting ends toward the back of the cargo area. That's the molding. And again, the metal trim area, and we were documenting some reddish stains that are on that molding. Could you take the laser pointer and just point out to the jurors these reddish stains that you were documenting in this photograph? I believe the areas of interest were right about in here. And I apologize for those who are just listening because I keep hoping that they're going to describe this so that it's actually on the record in the transcript itself, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. So if you're interested in seeing these photos, you can just head over to it's the Beach House 34 YouTube channel. And within there is a playlist called The Trial Files. And it has all of the transcripts reading, just like we have now, but it also has the images that were used in court. So that's just a little aside. And let's continue. I believe it was next exhibit, please. And it says this would be States Exhibit 299. This is the interior portion of the rear cargo door. Okay, the panel that's on that cargo door. And again, we were photographing this to show stain patterns. And again, could you take the laser pointer and just point out those stained areas that you were trying to document? Yes, there's some over here, and I believe there were a few over here. Next exhibit, please. That would be Exhibit 300. This is a more of what we would consider an overall view of the whole cargo area of the RAV4. And could you point out for the jurors, again, that area that you did your presumptive test for blood? Yes, it would have been approximately in this area here. Next exhibit, please. This would be States Exhibit 301. This would be the driver's side of the cargo area of the panel and the portion of the floor and rear seat. Next exhibit, please. States Exhibit 302. This is showing that the battery cable was disconnected from the battery. And on which vehicle is this photograph? This is on the RAV4. Next exhibit. This would be State's Exhibit 303. This is of the Grand Am, which was our item B. This is the front of the Grand Am showing the condition of the vehicle. And this is the vehicle that belongs to Steven Avery. That is correct. And the next slide, please. Next slide. This would be State's Exhibit 304. This is a view from the passenger side of that Grand Am showing the passenger seat, the front dash, the floor, and part of the, it says console area. And would you go to the final exhibit? Yes, sir. That would be State's Exhibit 305. This is just a closer view of that middle console area in the front seat, the gear shift knob, and some of the surfaces of that console area. Was there any particular reason to take this photograph? If I remember correctly, I believe Nick Stalkey wanted me to show some stains that were located near or on that, or that he perceived to be stains. All right. Attorney Gunn then says, thank you. That's all I have. Seriously? No follow-up questions? No. Wow. Okay. The court then says, Mr. Buting. And Attorney Buting says, thank you, Judge, and then begins his cross-examination. Good morning, Mr. Groffy. Good morning, sir. I won't be very long with you, but just bear with me one moment. We'll mark a few other exhibits. I will put these up here for the moment, and then I'll get right back to them. Let me just start, though. You said that these photographs were taken on November 6th, right? Some of them were. That's correct, sir. And that was a Sunday, correct? That is correct, sir. Now, you actually were called in sometime early on Sunday, right? My supervisor called me approximately mid-morning and asked if I could come in and assist. Okay, that's correct. You don't normally work on Sundays? Normally, no, I do not. Okay. It was your understanding, though, that this Toyota RAV4 had arrived at your Madison lab sometime very, very late the night before, Saturday night, early morning Sunday? I don't know that for sure, sir. Okay. Well, when she called you in, your supervisor, would that be Lucy Meyer? That's correct. Did she tell you that this had just arrived and that you were going to be one of the first people to see it? She had conveyed to me that they had received a vehicle at the laboratory for processing, and she was wondering if I could come in and assist and do the photography on the vehicle. Okay. And when you arrived, it was parked in the garage that was displayed in that first photograph. That's correct. And when you approached, were the doors standing open or were they closed? The doors to the vehicle, sir? Yes. The doors to the vehicle were closed. Okay. Did you have gloves on as you approached the vehicle? As I approached the vehicle? Yes. Not as I approached the vehicle. No. There's a large area around the vehicle. Okay. At some point, you touched portions of the vehicle, though, right? That is correct. I did. And before you did that, you put gloves on? I put a laboratory coat on and gloves. That's correct, sir. Okay. And did you, with your gloved hands, try the driver's side door handle? Yes, I did. It was locked or unlocked? The driver's door was unlocked when I got there. Okay. The other doors were locked? Yes, the other doors were locked. And that would be actually 4 more doors, correct? Including the rear? That's correct. 4 doors. Now, if I understand, what you did was, by opening the driver's side door, you were able to sort of reach over and, with your gloves, unlock the front passenger side door first, right? That's correct. I did that. And then from that location, that position on either side, front and passenger, you were able to easily reach around and unlock the rear driver and passenger side doors. That's correct. I unlocked those doors. And then you were able to open all 4 of those doors wide open for taking pictures and whatnot? That is absolutely correct. And that's how it got to the appearance that we see in those photographs that you showed earlier, taking pictures of the side, the front, and the rear side passenger and driver's side doors. That's correct. And then you and another individual by the name of Steve Harrington, he was also there. That's correct. Steve was also there at that time. He's another forensic scientist with the crime lab. He is currently retired. Okay, but was he employed then? At that time, he was employed. Yes, sir. Okay, and the two of you then did this presumptive test for blood? That is not correct. I did the presumptive test for the blood. Okay. Was that a phenolphthalein test or was that some other test? That is what we called a phenolphthalein test. Okay. So is it specific for human and animal or just any kind of blood? I do not have that knowledge, sir. Okay. But you did get a positive on the ignition stain and that larger area that you mentioned over in the cargo area, kind of on the passenger side. That's correct. I had a positive test for those two areas. Those are the only two areas that you tested, though. That is correct. Did you do any other tests that day or take any other pictures? My activities were limited to photographing the exterior portions of the RAV4 and then the interior portions that we could get photographs of without actually having to go inside the vehicle and get those pictures before other analysts could have a chance at processing the vehicle. Okay. And then a decision was made with you and your supervisor, Lucy Meyer, not to process the Toyota anymore that day, and that you would instead wait until morning when the forensic DNA analyst and other types of people would be normally working. Is that right? That is correct. Okay. The photographs that you displayed, though, do you still have those up in front of you? Which ones are you referring to, sir? All the ones that you introduced? Yes, I do. On direct. Okay. With the exception of the ones of the Pontiac Grand Am, I'm not directing your attention to those right now at all. But with respect to the RAV4 pictures, do you know, were all of those taken on November 6th, or were some of them also taken on the 8th? And if so, do you know which ones were on the 6th and which ones were on the 8th? That's my question. This may take a moment. That's fine. I believe I'm ready. Okay. Could you just tell us which ones, if any, were taken on the 6th? That would be States Exhibit 289, 290, 292, and 293 of the ones that I have. Okay. With Mr. Gunn's indulgence, I'm going to use, I have got duplicates of those exhibits. They are just larger. So I'm going to use those on the Elmo. So this is 290, right? I believe 289, 289, that's correct. 290 is the picture of the sort of looking in the driver's door access to the passenger side with the passenger door open. That's correct. 291 was not one of them, you said, right? That's not one that I would have here with me. Hang on a second, sir. That's correct. That is not one of them. So what was the next one you mentioned? 292. Okay, that's this one here. That's correct. And that's looking in at the front passenger seat, right? That is correct. It shows a black case of some sort, a Aquafina bottle, and some other nail polish or something, right? Yes. Okay. And then, I'm sorry, was there just one more? 293. That's really the same direction. It's just farther back, right? That's also correct. Looking through the passenger door, front passenger door, is that it? That would be it for that date of these pictures that I have, sir. Okay. So then I just want to clarify something here. Turning your attention to number 300, which is this kind of overall view of the cargo area. Yes, sir. This shows very little in there basically shows an empty cargo area with the exception of a crumpled piece of paper of some sort and what looks like a parking light lens assembly or something. That could be, yes. Did you notice whether there were ever more items in the rear of this area, or was it always, when you first saw it, did it look like this? When I opened up the cargo door and took this photograph, that was what was in the back of that vehicle, sir. Okay. Did you ever see any other items in this? Or maybe let's turn to the rear seat. Do you have a picture of that looking in? I don't know if you do. Do you ever recall finding other stuff in the interior of this RAV4 other than the few items, loose items that we seem to see here in this photograph and in Exhibit 293? I did not physically process the vehicle, sir. All I did was photograph it. Other analysts might have, but I did not. Okay. So you don't know whether, for instance, there was any cardboard boxes or other soda bottles or clothing items or anything like that found in the vehicle? If I saw them, I don't recall it. And would you have been asked to take photographs of any of those kinds of items before they had been removed or touched in any way? I may or may not have been. It would have been at the discretion of the analyst processing the vehicle whether or not they wanted that photographed. Okay. And to your recollection today, do you recall seeing any other pictures that you may have that you didn't bring with you today that would show those items? I have contact sheets of all the photographs that I took of the vehicle, but I would have to look at those. Okay. You don't have any recollection right now of that, though. No, I do not. All right. Just a couple more things. There's 3 new exhibits that I have given you. Would you take a look at those? Oh, by the way, just so we're clear, all of the other photographs that we didn't discuss as having been taken on November 6th were those taken on November 8th. They would have been taken on November 7th and 8th. Okay, 2 days? Yes, all right. Can you identify Exhibit 306, 7, and 8? States Exhibit 306 is the front of the vehicle, the bumper area where there is the headlight and it appears to be a missing light fixture. Okay, I will put these up in a moment. Go ahead and identify all 3 of those. And you took these photographs? That is correct, sir. This is States Exhibit 307. This is a overall photograph of the back of the RAV4. Okay. This is States Exhibit 308. This is a view primarily of, I guess you would call it, the wheel cover of the spare tire that's on the back of the RAV4. Okay, let me just quickly put this up on the screen. The first one you mentioned was this would be the driver's side bumper, front bumper, appears to have some damage to it. That is correct, sir. And that's the parking running light assembly that's missing. If that's the correct terminology, yes. Okay. And do you know if that item that we saw in the rear cargo area is from here or not? I do not know that, sir. Okay. And then this was the number 307 is the sort of wide shot of the rear of the vehicle. That is correct. Would you just please indicate with the pointer where the rear cargo door handle is to open the door, if you can use that laser pointer? If I remember correctly, I believe it's right in this area here. Let the witness reflect, or the record should indicate that the witness is pointing to what looks to be the far left side of the cargo door, over by the tail light assembly. The court says the record will so reflect. He then continues. And we'll zoom in on that so it's a little clearer. It's also next to what looks like a dealer sticker that says Lemieux Green Bay. And that's correct, sir. And does that look like that's where the key goes in as well? I believe that's the position where the key was put in. Yes. Okay. Now, showing you the last one, 308, this is a closer up view of what we were just looking at. So I don't have to have it zoomed as much. That's the wheel cover you are talking about? That is correct. I noticed it looks kind of dusty. Is that because it had already been fingerprinted by the fingerprint people? No, this is the condition that we received the vehicle in. It is one of my duties is to photographically document this before it is processed. So that would have been the condition that the RAV4 was received at the laboratory. Are you entirely sure about that? Let me just direct your attention to the far left side there above the RAV4. Do you see, isn't that some sort of a sticker, oblong white sticker up there? Yes, that appears to be one of the scales that we used for denoting where fingerprints are. Okay. So it appears then that perhaps the fingerprint people had already been through here, or at least looked at some of the vehicles. When this particular photograph was taken, yes. Okay. So is that the sort of thing that the fingerprint people put on when they find what they think might be a usable or a latent print, fingerprint or palm print? They usually use those stickers to identify areas that they want us to photograph. Okay. Do you know if you took a closer up picture of that particular area? I did take some photographs of fingerprints that were on the RAV4 at the direction of forensic scientist Michael Riddle. So those negatives would probably be in his possession. Okay. And when you take those are just negatives. You don't print them out like this. No, our common procedure is that we put them on photographic film, and then we also supply a negative to the examiner to work off of. Okay. And on the wheel cover, do you see some markings that almost look like fingers? There and there. That is on the upper surface of that wheel cover of the RAV4. One of reasons I took a photograph similar to that before it was dusted for fingerprints was because I did observe what looked like to be two handprints on that wheel cover. Okay. And then a little bit lower on that, there also appears to be some other sort of markings. I don't know if you can describe what those are at all. Do these appear to be handprints to you as well, or no? That I don't know, sir. Okay. But you don't believe, I mean, you believe this is the way it actually looked without adding any kind of fingerprint dust to it? That is correct, sir. That being the wheel cover, right? That is correct. Okay. Did you happen to notice as you were taking photographs of this portion of the cargo door where the door handle is and the key goes in? It looks like on this prior photograph, I don't see that little scale you mentioned. It doesn't appear to be in that photograph. No, sir. Okay. Did you happen to notice, though, as you were taking those close-up photos of the negatives that you said you gave to Mr. Riddle, did you happen to notice whether there was anything that appeared to be a blood stain in that area? I don't recall. Okay. Do you recall Mr. Riddle directing your attention to anything, saying, "Hey, let's take a picture of this. This looks like this might be a blood stain of some sort or a dark reddish type stain"? I don't recall that conversation. No, I don't. Okay, all right. Now, last area of questioning is you also took some measurements of the vehicle, correct? That is correct. I did. And those measurements were done at the request of Mr. Fassbender, who is sitting in court today, right? That is also correct. You were in phone contact with him when he was out at the scene up in the Mishicot area. I don't know if he was at the scene when he contacted me, but okay. But he did contact me by phone. Okay. And he suggested that you take some seat measurements of I guess, the front driver's seat, right? That's correct. Let's just see if that area, maybe I have it up there. And those seat measurements are done sometimes just to document before anybody touches it to see just how close up or how far back that driver's seat is, right? That is correct, sir. All right. Showing Exhibit 290 to you, I believe it's up on the screen. As I understand it, you don't actually see the brake pedal here, but what you do is you measure from the brake pedal up to the front curvature of the driver's seat. Yes, in this particular case, that is one of the measurements that I took. And you came up with 18 inches, right? Yes, I did. You also measure from the floor directly down underneath in front of the seat, right up to the top curvature of the seat and take that measurement as well. I wouldn't say underneath the seat, but it would have been on the same plane as the front of the seat to the floor. Okay. And so that would give you the seat height off of the floor, the approximate height. Yes. And in this instance, you got 12 and a half inches, right? That's correct. And then you also measure from the center of the steering wheel to the back of the driver's seat, the seat back. That's correct. I also did that. And in this instance, you got 23 1/4 inches. That is correct. And that's without adjusting the angle of the seat back, tilting it forward, or that's leaving it the way it was, right? That's with the seat in the position as we received it. That is correct. Okay. And then you also, in addition to taking those measurements at some point, I guess just so I'm clear, this was actually on November 8th, right? Yes. So this was after the vehicle had been processed for DNA, right? I believe Miss Colhane had finished her examinations at that point. So it was okay for you to lean inside of it and, touch things at that point, right? Yes, but we still wore the appropriate clothing. Okay. But then you actually sat inside in the driver's seat in the position that it was, correct? Yes, we did that. And you did that, and you are 5'11", right? Yes, that's pretty close. And you found that it was very uncomfortable, cramped for you with the seat in that position, right? That's correct. It was a very tight fit for me. Your knees hit the console when you tried to brake, for instance. Yes. And you also had Mr. Nick Stalkey, your blood spatter guy, do that? Yes, Nick also did that because he's smaller in stature than I am. He's about 5'7", about 5'7.5", rounded off 5'7". And just one moment, I won't ask you for Mr. Stalkey's characterization of whether he could fit or not, but did you see him sit in? Yes, I did. Did it look like his foot or his knee was also hitting the console at all? He conveyed to me, no, don't. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't tell me what he conveyed. That would be hearsay. We'll deal with that. Just what you could observe. It appeared to me that it was also a close fit for Mr. Stalkey. All right. Attorney Buting says that's all I have. Thank you. The witness says, you're welcome. The court says, Mr. Gahn, any redirect? And Attorney Gahn says, no, Your Honor. And then the court says, very well, the witness is excused. We started with the witness a little late this morning, so we'll take our morning break at this time and try to make it about 10 minutes. And Attorney Gahn says, Your Honor, before the jury leaves, I would like to move in the exhibits 289 to 305 photographs. The court says, any objection? Attorney Buting says, no objection. I also would like to move in exhibits 306, 7, and 8, which I'm returning. The court says, any objection from the state? And Attorney Gahn says, no, Your Honor. And then the court says, very well, all of those exhibits are admitted. Members of the jury, I will remind you again not to discuss this matter, such and such. And at this point, a 10-minute recess is taken, and we are going to end this episode and then get into why a bunch of these details really matter in the summary and check and see if Steven's post-conviction attorney, Kathleen Zellner, had anything to say about this. All right, so before we get into the wrap-up, let's hear what Steven's post-conviction attorney, Kathleen Zellner, had to say about this portion of the testimony. So let's start with Katie Halbach, Teresa's younger sister. As we just heard, Katie told the jury that Teresa owned a pair of Daisy Fuentes jeans. That's the line the prosecution used to connect the rivets that they found in the burn barrel. I believe it was the burn barrel. I don't think we've moved to the burn pit yet. Yep, burn barrel directly to Teresa. But Zellner then pointed out that Katie never said that Teresa actually wore those jeans on the day that she disappeared, only that she owned them. It's a very small distinction, but an important one. Over time, that single detail got treated like proof that the burned clothing came from Teresa herself. I wonder how many other people actually owned that brand. There were lots of females that lived on the property, right? Zellner's point was that when it comes to family memories, some of these, and she was 15, right? She's 15 on the stand. She couldn't quite recall when she saw these, when she talked to Teresa about these, and so forth and so on. So that's really kind of a can be misinterpreted, especially once they're in the hands, a 15-year-old is in the hands of a prosecutor who's done this for years, right? Then there's Ron Groffy, the state crime lab photographer who took pictures of Teresa's RAV4 after it was moved to the Madison crime lab. In his testimony, he said something that stuck with Zellner. And honestly, this hit me too, because I wanted to go back and check. When he went to photograph the vehicle, the driver's side door of Teresa's vehicle was unlocked. Why does this matter? Because according to earlier testimony, the SUV was locked when it was first found on the Avery property. Somewhere between the field and the crime lab, arriving at the crime lab, or at least Groffy seeing this vehicle, that had changed. Maybe it was intentional, maybe not. But if it was accessed in transit or before the final photos were taken, that does raise some real questions about chain of custody. Basically whether the evidence was really as secure as the state had claimed that it was. Zellner's larger argument was pretty simple, actually. These little inconsistencies, what people remembered, how evidence was handled, when it was photographed, all of this stuff. And this is just two witnesses, right? I mean, she has stuff about everybody. All of these chip away at the idea that this case was never as clean as it really appeared to be on paper. So let's wrap up this episode. Today's testimony gave us two very different perspectives, one emotional, one very technical, but both kind of talked about the same question. How reliable was the state's evidence really? So let's start with Katie. She told the jury that Teresa owned this pair of jeans and even teased her sister about them being quote unquote old person jeans. God help us, 15-year-old thinking somebody over 20 is old. The small detail became a really big moment for the prosecution because those rivets, or at least the one that they constantly show in court, found in the burn barrel had the Daisy Fuentes label on them. And from that, the state built a link, the fact that the rivets just must have come from Teresa's jeans. But here's the thing. Katie never said that Teresa wore those jeans, only that she owned them. The prosecution treated this ownership like confirmation, turning a memory about a clothing brand into this cornerstone, their theory that Teresa's clothing had been destroyed on the Avery property. Then came Ron Groffy, the state crime lab photographer who documented Teresa's RAV4 after it showed up in Madison. He testified he was called in on Sunday, November 6th, his day off, to take pictures of the vehicle. Because if we go back and we remember the previous testimony, they had discovered it on the 5th on the Avery salvage property yard, had somebody bring it in. They wanted it in an enclosed trailer so that evidence didn't get all mixed up as they drove it from the salvage yard to the crime lab. And Groffy said that, so he's called in, he's got to come in the morning, take photographs of this vehicle that evidently had just arrived, although he could not confirm that, right? He wasn't there. He wasn't the one who delivered it. But he said that the driver's side door was unlocked, though the rest of the vehicle's doors were locked. And this caught attention because earlier witnesses had testified that they said the SUV was locked when they found it on Avery's property. So something changed between the field and the lab, and no one could point to exactly when or who made that change. And another thing is that Groffy was asked by the prosecution, this exhibit 290, one of the key photos of the vehicle's interior was taken on November 6th. This would have been the day that he was called into work. But when the defense is questioning him, they talk about the same exhibit number 290, and they're like, and this was taken on the 8th, right? And he says, yes. So I'm very confused about this. Why are you agreeing to two different dates? So anyhow, the big thing, or at least I think right now, the big thing for what it's worth is that the vehicle, or here's the assumption, the vehicle had already been accessed or processed before those quote unquote original condition photographs were actually taken. And what the jury is looking at isn't truly the vehicle in its original condition. It's a snapshot after the scene had already been disturbed. That's not what you want in a case that hinges on this integrity, right, of the forensic evidence. So that's essentially where we end this day of testimony. In the next episode, we move from photographs to the science behind them. And the state calls Sherry Culhane, the forensic scientist from the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, who was responsible for the DNA testing on this case. She handled the blood, the swabs, the key, every piece of evidence that became central to the state and the prosecution's story. And just be forewarned, I mean, I haven't read this, but I've read other trial transcripts where doctors and such have been on the stand. This is going to get a little technical, I would assume. But here's one thing I can promise you, it's going to be long. So it's likely going to be broken up into several episodes, at least two. However, she does not run into the next day. So that's a good thing. She's on the stand only for the remainder of this one day. And that will be it for this episode. Thank you. Thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate you all so, so much. I will be back soon with the next episode. Bye for now.